July 6, 2019, Teterboro Airport in New Jersey. A private jet fresh from Paris touches down. But its owner, the financier Jeffrey Epstein, isn't heading for a relaxing weekend. Nope. Federal agents are waiting for him right there on the tarmac. He's arrested, and this mugshot is taken. This was the moment his whole world, this carefully built empire of power and impunity, really started to crack.
But here's the thing. This arrest wasn't the start of the story. Not even close. It was really the explosive finale to a saga that had been going on for decades. A story of manipulation, power, and horrific abuse. So the real question we have to ask is, how did one of the most connected men on the planet build an empire that could protect him for so long? And what finally brought it all down? To get that, we have to go back to the very beginning.
You see, to really understand Epstein's crimes, you first have to understand the fortress he built around himself. And I'm not just talking about a financial empire. This was an empire of influence. And it was designed for one reason and one reason only: to create a shield of credibility so thick he'd seem totally untouchable. And the cornerstone of that whole fortress? It all came down to one single relationship: his connection to billionaire Leslie Wexner, the guy who founded Victoria's Secret. The second Epstein became Wexner's personal money manager, he was suddenly seen as this financial wizard. That one connection was his golden ticket. It opened every door, getting him into the most elite circles of power and wealth. Wexner even paid for Epstein's infamous mansion in New York. So with that newfound credibility as his main weapon, Epstein went to work, masterfully weaving this incredible network of the world's most powerful people. I mean, his private jet, the Lolita Express, became this revolving door for presidents, princes, politicians, you name it. And let's be clear, these were not just social calls. Every flight, every party, every handshake was a calculated move to build a web of influence that would protect him from any consequences. And he wasn't hiding in the shadows either. He was out there, in the open, seen as this charismatic, maybe a little eccentric, but accepted member of the elite. This 2002 quote from Donald Trump in New York Magazine kind of says it all about how he was perceived back then. "I've known Jeff for 15 years. Terrific guy." This was the public image, the facade he worked so hard to maintain. But behind that glittering facade, well, that's where the real story is. There was a dark, meticulously organized criminal enterprise. This wasn't random or opportunistic. It was a predatory ecosystem designed with the cold precision of a stock portfolio, all for one horrific purpose: the systematic abuse of vulnerable young girls. The sheer business-like efficiency of his method is what's so chilling. He and his accomplices like Ghislaine Maxwell didn't just stumble upon victims. They targeted them, specifically looking for minors in desperate financial situations. The bait was simple: cash for massages. But the most insidious part? He turned his victims into recruiters, paying them a $200 finder's fee for every new girl they brought in. It created this monstrous, self-perpetuating cycle of abuse. And this isn't just speculation. This right here, this is a page from the Federal Indictment. Look at the cold, legal language they use to describe something so awful. How a girl would be provided for a nude or semi-nude massage, and how Epstein would then escalate the nature and scope of the physical contact. This was a perfected, repeatable system, laid out in black and white. So, this brings us to the biggest question of all, right? How did a guy running an operation this massive get away with it for decades without any real consequences? The answer is just as shocking as the crimes themselves. He used his power to bend the justice system, turning it into his own personal shield. Just look at his first big escape. In 2005, Palm Beach police start digging around. By 2007, federal prosecutors have a mountain of evidence. But instead of a huge trial, they secretly negotiate this non-prosecution agreement. The result? Epstein pleads guilty to a couple of minor state charges and serves just 13 months. And get this, for most of that time, he had work release, letting him leave the jail for up to 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. It was barely a punishment.
I mean, just look at the difference here. On the left is what federal prosecutors in Florida had in their hands: a massive 53-page indictment that could have locked him up for life. And on the right, what Epstein got: a secret deal that let him plead to minor charges and, this is the crazy part, gave total immunity to him and any of his potential co-conspirators. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card for his entire criminal network.
For more than a decade, that secret deal actually worked. Sure, Epstein was a registered sex offender, but he was still traveling in all the same elite circles. But then, thanks to some relentless investigative journalism, especially from the Miami Herald and the incredible courage of its survivors, that shield of impunity finally started to get some holes poked in it. Which brings us right back to where we started, July 6, 2019. That decade of coasting by came to a sudden, crashing halt. This time it was federal prosecutors from the Southern District of New York, and they came armed with a brand new indictment for sex trafficking. His long run was finally over. Or so it seemed.
So Epstein was being held at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan, a super high-security federal jail. What happened next has been called a perfect storm of screw-ups by the Attorney General himself. It was just this bizarre, unbelievable series of failures that led directly to his death.
The countdown to the end really begins on the night of August 9th. At 10:30 p.m., the 2 guards who were assigned to Epstein's unit just stopped doing their required 30-minute checks on the inmates. That was the first critical mistake in a long line of them. For the next 8 hours, instead of watching one of the most high-profile inmates in the entire country, what were these guards doing? They were browsing the internet, they were sleeping. And to cover their tracks, they systematically faked the log entries, creating a paper trail of rounds that they never actually made.
So it wasn't until 6:30 the next morning when they finally decided to do a check that it was way too late. Jeffrey Epstein was found unresponsive in his cell. For 8 critical hours, he had been left completely and totally alone.
But the guards falling asleep, that was just the tip of the iceberg. Turns out he had been left without a cellmate, which was a direct violation of protocol. Required head counts were just skipped. And, almost too crazy to believe, the security cameras pointing right at his cell? Oh, they just happened to have been broken for weeks. It was a total, complete, systemic breakdown.
Now, the official story is very clear. The New York City medical examiner ruled his death a suicide by hanging. A separate FBI investigation looked into it and found no evidence to suggest anything else. But the sheer number of failures and coincidences that allowed it to happen, well, that's what has fueled so much public suspicion and so many theories ever since.
And so, the man at the center of it all is gone. But the story is far from over. With key flight logs and records still sealed, and a whole network of powerful people who helped him still largely unaccounted for, it leaves us with one final haunting question. What other parts of this story, and who else, is still hiding out there in the shadows?